Now we are going to start with the sexual reproduction in plants. You know that sexual reproduction occur mainly in the flowering plants, and before we do that you should know that the reproductive organ, reproductive part, you can say that reproductive part of the plant is the flower. That is the flower. So now we are going to see that what is the basic structure for the flower and what are the male reproductive or the female reproductive organs which are present in the flower. So while I am drawing these diagrams, what you do is you just imagine a rose flower in your mind, then you will come to know and you will be familiar with the parts which I am going to mention in this case. So the flower looks like this. The stalk is called as pedicel. It has a bulged portion which is called as thalamus. It has green colored leaves on it. These are called as sepals. We have brightly colored petals over it. It encloses actually a female and a male reproductive part. How it looks like? A female reproductive part is like this. And male reproductive parts are like this. So this is a basic structure of the flower. Now moving on to the the male and the female reproductive part. So how it looks like? We see that because we know that a flower obviously consists of male and female reproductive part. So we say that this is female reproductive part and this is the male reproductive part. Now how it looks like? So if we talk about female reproductive part, which is generally called as pistil, it consists of, it is like this. This is called as stigma. This tube-like structure is style. This bulged portion is ovary. It has a placenta, that is the nutritive tissue. And here we have many small structures appearing to be spherical somehow, that is the ovules. So this is what is a female reproductive part. I think you got it. This is stigma. This is style, this is ovary, this is placenta, that is the nutritive tissue, and here we have ovules, which is the female gamete. Now coming on to the male reproductive part. Male reproductive part is generally called as, the common name for it is anther or stamen, whatever you can call. It appears to be like this. It has a filament. This has a filament. Here we have is a lobe, that is anther lobe, enclosing the male gamete, that is the pollen grains. That is the pollen grain. So this is the male reproductive part. And you know that when the collective female reproductive part is being given a technical term, that is the gynoecium. That is the gynoecium. And if we talk about the male reproductive part, collection of many stamens, they are referred to a technical term, that is the androecium. So whenever you get a word like this, gynoecium, that means we are talking of the many female reproductive parts, and when we are talking of androecium, we are talking about many male reproductive parts. Now we know that we have these are the organs, so obviously they will produce gametes. So what are the gametes they produce? So we see that female reproductive part gamete is ovule. Female reproductive part gamete is ovule, and that of male is pollen grain. Is pollen grain. So what is the structure of ovule? It is like this. It has a sac. It has a sac-like structure which is called as embryo sac. Which is called as embryo sac. It has 3 cells towards each corner. So let us draw that. 3 cells here, 3 cells this side, and 2 cells fused together. Let's make nucleus of all. Like this. The cells which are present at this end, these 3 cells, they are called as antipodal cells. They are called as antipodal cells. And the cells which are present in this lower portion, these 2 cells, they are referred to as synergids. These are synergids. And the one which is at top, it is a special cell called as egg cell. This is the egg cell. Now, what is the name for the cell we found in the middle, that is formed by the fusion of 2 cells? That is again referred to as a special cell, that is the polar nuclei. So this is what is present in an embryo sac. Now it has a layers also around it. So let's start making layer. You have to leave space here. The layer is not a continuous, it has a, you can say, a point where this layer is absent. You can see it. So this is the layer like this. Again we have one more layer. So it is present like this. It's present like this. This inner layer is called as nucellus and the outer layer is called as integument. The point where these layers are absent, I told you it is not a continuous one, it has a point where these layers are absent, that is called as, that is again a special opening called as micropyle. That is called as micropyle, and this stalk is called as funicle. Is called as funicle. So this is the structure for the matured ovule. It is a structure for the matured ovule. Now coming on to pollen grain, what structure it possesses actually? Pollen grain has 2 layers. The inner one is flexible and it is called as intine. The outer one is horny. It is, you know that why it appears to be horny or why it is having a certain kind of spines over it, so that it should not get destroyed by birds or insect or anything. That means it is not affected by any of the, you can say, any of the factor. And this layer is inflexible, but it is called as exine. So it has 2 layers, the outer one is exine, inner one is intine. It has fluid in it. We know that most of the time, or you can say every time, the fluid which is present in the cell is called as cytoplasm. So here also it is referred to as cytoplasm. Now what does it have? It has a cell that is called as tube cell. It has one cell which is called as tube cell, and also it possesses 2 gametes that is called as male gametes. So it has 2 male gametes. So you can say that this is a structure for the matured pollen grain. So you can say that matured pollen grain has a 3-cell structure because it possesses 3 cells. So obviously it is called as 3-celled structure. So see that before starting with this answer, that is how the sexual reproduction take place, you should be thorough with these diagrams, because once you are thorough with these diagrams, then only you can carry out the process that how actually it takes place. So first thing what you do is try to draw these diagrams along with the labeling, because once you will be thorough with it, then only you will be able to know that what kind of terms we will be using. You will be familiar with those terms and it will be easy for you to learn this answer. So this is what is the diagrams which is involved in the reproduction in flowering plants. So if you get a question like this, so you need to start your answer like this, that the reproductive part of the plant is flower, then the structure for flower, then write the female reproductive part, draw their figures, then write female gamete, draw their diagrams, and just mention they are matured. These are the structures for the matured ovule and the matured pollen grain. Now after that you need to mention, like if you had a question like you need to explain the whole phenomena, then we will be writing that what happened actually, then you will say that pollination take place. Now what is pollination? Pollination is transfer of pollen, these pollens, from the anther to the stigma of the flower. Then what happened actually? We know that we have 2 kinds of flowers. Basically we have unisexual flowers which have only one sex in it, and we have bisexual flowers which have both the sexes in it. So depending upon that, the pollination can be self or a cross pollination. And you know that pollination is the transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma of the flower. It can be of the same flower, it can happen between the flowers of the same plant, or it may happen between the you can say that like flower of one plant with the flower of the another plant. So that means either of the pollination can take place, can be self also, and it can be cross also. It can be self, that means in the same flower, and it can be cross, that means between the two flowers of the same plant or two flowers of the different plant. So and you know that how this pollen grain, because it is not motile, it cannot move actually. So there we need the agencies. There we need the agencies. Agencies can be birds, they can be insects, they can be wind, they can be water. So these factors can just help the pollen grain reach from the anther to the stigma of the flower. So the first of all, the pollination has to happen, because if the pollination won't happen, then how the whole mechanism will take place. So the first thing is that pollination should be there, that is the transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma of flower, can be self, can be cross, and there we need the agencies, that is wind, water, insects, birds. They all can act as a, you can say, the agent which can carry the pollen grain from the anther to the stigma. So anyhow, when the pollen grain reaches, let's assume that pollen grain reaches the stigma of the flower. So let's say this is the pollen grain. We have tube nucleus and two male gametes, and we know that inside the ovary there is an ovule. So I'm going to draw a detailed structure for that. We have pollen nuclei, then layer, one more layer. So it is present like this. So what happened when pollen grain reaches the stigma of the flower? So here certain nutrients are present. Here certain nutrients are present. So what does pollen grain do? It absorbs that nutrients. This pollen grain absorb nutrients. So when it absorbs nutrients, so as a result, obviously if something is going inside, it will swell up. So that means it absorbs certain nutrients and swell up, due to which its exine ruptures. I told you that this exine is inflexible, so it cannot expand actually. So when it gets swelled like this, so let's say this is swelled, this is tube cell, two male gametes, so its exine gets ruptured. And but intine is flexible, so it starts protruding out, and day by day it starts becoming long, and finally you can say that this tube gets elongated, and you know that the special name for the tube is the pollen tube. So again coming to here, so what is that pollen grain get deposited on the stigma through any agency. Here are certain nutrients, it absorbs that nutrient, swells up, as a result its exine rupture and in time forms a pollen tube. This pollen tube, let's say, grow day by day, and finally one day it grows such a long that it enters through a micropyle into an embryo sac. I told you that this is a special opening. So through this opening, the pollen grain gets elongated, and one day it enters the embryo sac through micropyle. And after entering, what does it do? It pours all its contents. So what was it contents? That is the tube cell and two male gamete along with the cytoplasm. Only it possesses this only. So obviously when this tube gets enters into the embryo sac through micropyle, it pours all its contents. Then after that, what happened? After that, one male gamete, because we know that it possesses two gametes, so out of it one, it is not like that the specific one, it can be any. So one male gamete fuses with the special cell, that is the egg cell, in order to form zygote. This fusion is being given, because you know that fusion is always called as fertilization, but in case of these flowering plants, fertilization has been given a special name, that is the syngamy. Is called as syngamy. You can also write the fertilization, but you may get the question like what is syngamy for 1 mark. So you should be familiar that syngamy is the fertilization, is a special name for the fertilization in case of plants. So what happened? Male gamete fuses with egg cell to form zygote. So there may be a chance that this fusion is not an appropriate one, but if this zygote is successfully formed, then only the next step we have. Otherwise, if the zygote is not formed successfully, then everything just gets stopped. But if the zygote is formed, you can say is formed properly, then what happened? The other male gamete, like one has been already fused with the egg cell, we are left with still the one. So the other male gamete fuses with the another special cell, that is the polar nuclei, this one, in order to form the endosperm. Again, this is the fusion, that is the fertilization. Here you won't be saying the syngamy. So this is the syngamy, and it is a basic fertilization. So male gamete fuses with polar nuclei to form endosperm, and you know that what this endosperm do actually? It provides nutrition to the developing zygote, which transforms into embryo on taking the nutrition, and finally into a seed, that is the reproductive unit, which we actually want. So that means the fate of this endosperm is to provide nutrition to the zygote. This zygote will take up nutrition and transforms into an embryo, undergoes various developmental stages, and finally forms the seed. So this is what is the fertilization. Now, as you have seen, like if we talk about this, you know that male gamete is haploid. That means it has one set of chromosome. Again, egg cell is haploid, and we know always the zygote is diploid. That means it has double set. One set becomes two, so it is diploid. Coming on to this, obviously male gamete again haploid. Polar nuclei is formed by the combination of two cells, so it is already diploid. It already have two sets. So now endosperm will inherit two sets from here, one set from here, so it will be triploid. You should know that endosperm is actually triploid. And we have a special name for this fertilization. As you can see, one male gamete, polar nuclei is formed of two cells. So three cells are fusing here. So it is being given a special name, that is the triple fusion. It's called as triple fusion. And as you have seen that two fertilization occurs in it. So therefore, the process is referred to as double fertilization. So this is what actually happened. Now what happens to the seed? We have the reproductive unit now. That is the seed which is produced as a result of this whole fertilization. Now we are going to plant that seed in this soil, and we are going to provide it all the conditions which are required, like water, sunlight, everything, nutrients. We will provide everything to it. So what happened? Under favorable condition, it will transforms into a seedling, and finally it will form a plantlet, and then we can transform into any other field because it will form a mature plant, and then again if it has a ability to form a tree, then also it can form a tree. So this is what is the sexual reproduction in the flowering plants. I think you got it. So the correct way to attempt this question is that just draw the diagrams first, then move on to pollination, define it, then explain the mechanism, this one, that it is deposited on stigma through any agency, absorb nutrients, swells up, exine ruptures, intine protrudes, pollen grain enters through micropyle, and these two fertilizations. And do not forget to mention the definitions for the triple fusion and the double fertilization, and along with that you need to mention the chromosome set also. This is also again very important. So after forming seed, you need to write two more lines, that seed under favorable condition will give rise to seedling, finally a plantlet.